Welcome to this week's Boss to Boss podcast. In our interviews, we feature remarkable sales and marketing minds doing imaginative things in often unimaginative markets, usually from the world of B2B. This week, we're joined by Owen Richards, the founder of Air Group, a telesales and marketing agency that have seen astonishing growth. Now, for as long as I can remember, people have been talking about the death of telesales. So when you see an agency like Air leading with that service that have grown to over 75 people in just 5 years, and all in spite of a major pandemic, in my mind that provides pretty compelling evidence that the art of the cold call is alive and well. That said, it's not a discipline in which I can pretend to have any great expertise, so I've been really looking forward to grilling Owen on exactly how a company should go about building a world-class telesales operation. Owen, thank you so much for joining us. Just going to kick off with a nice and generic one to begin with. So what would you describe as the top 3 traits of a great telesales expert in 2022?
Thanks for having me, firstly. Great question. There's a lot of traits you look for. I think the obvious one, which will last forever, is communication skills. I think you have to be a good communicator and you have to be good with people. And I don't think that will ever go away. So we might throw new things we're looking for in there over the years, but I don't think that one will ever be less important than anything else. I'd always probably default to that. I think one of the things that I see missed a lot particularly in the B2B space, is commercial acumen. I think telesales is typically associated with younger people or earlier stage career and people who I guess lacking life experience maybe in some ways. And I do find that people that have got that experience, and I don't necessarily mean in numbers of years, but been around a bit, traveled the world, commercial experience, a couple of different jobs, different sectors, maybe have taken the time to read some business books and understand a bit more outside of their world, and that commercial knowledge and acumen that is very hard to tangibly measure is often something that I can put my finger on and say that has really helped in that conversation or really helped to build rapport with senior decision makers. I mean, as a stakeholder, if somebody knows, it sounds like they know what you're talking about, it's a lot more enjoyable to talk to them. And typically people you're selling to in telesales are people that have a reasonable amount of knowledge because they're budget holders and they're stakeholders in a business. So I think those two, without a doubt. And then funnily enough, the third one for me, I always go back to, it's that sort of work ethic attitude thing, however you want to categorize it, because the job is hard, right? And it's not getting any easier. And if you are happy floating around sending 20 well-constructed emails a day, thinking that's outreach and prospecting, versus somebody who is prepared to do the hard yards, have 20 conversations a day, make 100 calls a day, or whatever it might take to get you there, that you accept that I'm going to get rejected and I'm not hiding behind email and I'm putting myself out there. But that attitude and that work ethic still today, even in a world where quality is counting more and more, counts a lot. So yeah, I think that attitude is something you can't create in somebody, and I think that gets you a long way in any role.
Absolutely. There's a couple of things I want to touch on there that you alluded to. So the first is, so you talked about the need for that kind of commercial acumen. I just wonder, does it help if there is a degree of sector focus? So let's imagine that a particularly telesales expert is focused on a particular sector or range of sectors. Does that help accelerate the process by which they can actually get up to speed sufficiently so they can have some of those more commercial, more strategic conversations? Is that an important factor at all?
Yeah, I think so. I think let's liken it for a second to something like acting. If you're a professional actor and you're going to play the role of a inmate in a prison, probably a professional actor would go and spend time in a prison to understand what that looks like and feels like and sounds like and smells like, and then they would pull that into the role that they do. I don't think that's any different with sales. If I'm going to spend time talking to business owners, the more I know about what it looks like, feels like to be a business owner, and I think you can draw that right down to things like sector. If I know that I'm talking to construction businesses, whatever experience I've got in and around construction is going to come across in that conversation, whether by design or by accident. And I'm going to understand, or be more likely to understand, the objections that they give me and the questions that they ask and the reasons why they might be asking that. And that allows me to be more relevant. And I think that word relevant and relevancy is coming into sales more and more now. It's about being relevant to the person you're talking to, because we get so many phone calls, so many people selling to us, so many emails, the ones that we respond to are the ones that are most relevant to us at that point in time. So that is a way in which you can make yourself more relevant, without a doubt.
So it seems to me that people have been talking about the imminent death of telesales since I started in business, probably quite a long time before then, I suspect. When's that moment actually going to arrive?
Yeah, certainly they've been saying it since I started as well. So look, I think my answer is that there would have to be some things that happen for it to arrive. And those things are things that I don't foresee in my lifetime, but who knows? When humans stop being trusted with decision making capabilities, at that point, it will end. Because the whole time humans are buying at reasonable budget sizes, the whole time emotion plays a role in the sales process and the buying process, the whole time logic plays, human logic plays a role in that. That's the whole time you need a human in the sales process. And, it doesn't matter whether you can look at social, you can look at email, you can look at video prospecting. All of these things are fairly one way, with the exception of social, but there's a delay between them and it's in text. And we all know how much of communication gets lost in written form a lot of the time. There is nothing as effective as a human conversation, ideally face to face, but accessibility makes that hard, particularly now more than ever. So having a verbal human conversation is the most efficient way to communicate with somebody. So is it getting harder? Yeah, absolutely. Is it going to end? No, I don't think so. I don't think we will see telesales die. It gets harder without a doubt, but the whole time there are no other channels that you can scale, like you can scale that. And the whole time humans are the people that make a decision as to whether I want to talk to you about your services or not. Human conversation is going to be required, and there is nothing more effective than the phone for having a human conversation at volume. So yeah, I don't think it's going to die, not in our lifetime.
I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I almost think that the more peripheral an activity becomes, the greater its impact because it's sort of less expected. One of my favorite topics is like costly signaling, right? And certain activities, they precisely because of their inefficiency and the fact that it is expensive to get somebody good quality to bang out, you know, God knows how many calls in a day versus like, the infinitely more efficient and scalable email marketing or, run a bot on social or, pay for some ads on LinkedIn or whatever it might be. So in a sense, the more peripheral it becomes, the more meaning I believe can be conveyed through it. And I feel like maybe people make a mistake of like, it's maybe the word telesales, right? Because I guess it's not really about the telephone part, it's about the audio part. And maybe it'll all be via WhatsApp in a few years or via some other thing. It's basically irrelevant what the medium is. It's like the verbal component is I guess, the key. Would you agree with any of that?
Yeah, and unless a tool more effective than the phone for that comes along, like you say, maybe there's a chip in our arm that allows us to talk to everyone. I don't know, but the phone is something that has evolved with us over the years. So 20 years ago, it was plugged in at home or on your desk, and now it's a piece of software on your screen or something that's got a camera and everything else. And they're evolving with us, and so the whole time that they do that, we all carry a phone. Every single one of us carries a phone and is going to continue to do that. So it'll always play a role. Don't get me wrong, 10 years ago, operations that were prospecting only using the phone are now doing so using email, using social alongside. And I have never been somebody who said we're a one channel, we're one channel play. I don't believe in one channel plays. I don't think it makes sense to just do outbound telesales and say that will solve all your problems, or just do PPC, or just do social selling. No strategy that has one element in it is successful. And if it is, it's only for a period of time and it breaks sooner or later. So other channels alongside it make absolute sense, but it will continue to play a mix in B2B, certainly outbound prospecting, top of funnel activity for the foreseeable future, unless there is a significant change that I don't understand what that looks like. If people truly believe people just don't like getting cold calls, yeah, okay, 80% of people might not. There's still 20% of people who are happy to buy, and the whole time there's enough people there saying yes to meetings, booking, and there's a reason that there are now 10,000 plus SDR roles in London alone, open vacancies, because people need people out there prospecting to grow their business and sell, and they recognize that it's a great opportunity to do that. And I'll just say one last thing. These things are cyclic. So, it was 10 years ago, everyone would say, oh, ditch it, let's go to digital. And then they realize that there are just other challenges with digital. It's not going to fix all, so we still need to go back to this. These things over my career have gone from people doing it more to people doing it less to people doing it more to people doing it less, and none of them are going to die unless something breaks in the system.
Absolutely. So presumably, even if you find somebody that satisfies all that earlier criteria you described, presumably they're still going to struggle if either the product they're representing is, absolute garbage, or there's no marketing support, as you've alluded to there. You still need that kind of that multi-channel mix. Or the technical team is shouting at customers, or there's some other kind of fundamental breakdown in operations. So what are the key things that a business needs to do in order to make the lives of people like those within your team, telesales experts, as straightforward and as effective as possible?
Yeah, good question. So I'll caveat all of this with it depends on what success is measured at the telesales or BDE, SDR level. So if it's just booking meetings, the reality is a good BDE or SDR should be able to book meetings regardless of the quality of the product, because actually if they're getting into the product and the detail of the product, they're probably going too far. That's one of the mistakes I see in people's sales cycles now. They're trying to get top of funnel conversations all the way through the sales cycle in one conversation, and getting SDRs or sales reps or telesales reps to book meetings that are so well qualified, and they're unable to be productive in a 5-minute conversation. So I'll caveat all of that with that I have a belief that top of funnel prospecting should be there to book a meeting for somebody who's far more qualified in the right environment with time set aside that's committed and dedicated to it. And I think there needs to be some qualification, but I'm not a believer in everything's got to be BANT qualified. I think that's just lazy salespeople asking people who are less qualified than them to do a job that's harder than they can do. So that's just maybe a personal gripe that I needed to get out there.
I like that.
I think going back to how can we help as a question, well, look, a great brand makes a great difference. So a really simple piece of data that will help support that argument. We run one campaign and we have 2 people sponsoring that campaign, a technology company, and they are part funded by one of their partners, and one of their partners is a very big brand. We ran an A/B test using both of their brands. So, hey, it's so-and-so calling from XYZ. And in the case where it was the unknown channel partner, we saw less than half the amount of calls connecting with the decision maker. So we were able to have more than 2 times the number of conversations with decision makers in the same resource time with the same people doing it, just because people were more likely to answer the phone or say yes to taking that call when their receptionist phoned and said, hey, I've got so-and-so from XYZ on the phone. So we were able to have twice the number of conversations, and the conversion to meeting from those conversations again was more than double. So this is, no other things have changed. So the same sales reps, the same conversation, the same messaging, just the words, just the name of the company. And that shows trust. People trust a brand or they don't trust a brand. So in this case, it was a very good tier 1 technology brand that we would all know, and probably at least 80% of the population will use it as part of their daily lives at work. And that makes a huge difference. So we're suddenly having 2 times the number of conversations and converting more than 2 times those conversations into meetings. You're running a lot faster with the same resource because brand has played an important part there. So you cannot underestimate the power of brand, which mid and enterprise level is obviously going to be important. But even at SME level, they might not know you, but when they go, what do people do now? You're talking to them, they flip up your website. If it looks like it was built in 1974 and it's a bit clunky and updated, it hasn't been updated and it's still in Times New Roman, then people are going to judge you for that. They're going to form an opinion. They're going to see a certain type of company. If you look dynamic and innovative and you've got fresh content and you're up to date and you've got a personality, people are more likely to engage with you. So I think brand, and that falls into online, it falls into collateral, it falls into word of mouth and what people say about you. All of that, content, all of those things make a huge difference. And then I think the other piece is environment, culture, and sales leadership. There are too many companies that will hire SDRs, BDEs, sales reps, whatever you want to call them, plonk them in a corner and expect them to make 100 calls a day and they'll be fine. They'll book us meetings. They don't give them the cultural support, the right environment, the atmosphere, or the right leadership to be successful. And we don't develop people around leadership. Sales is still something that there's no qualification for, so people fall into it. And then we're getting junior reps trained with bad habits. So I think as organizations, we need to give them that. We need to give them the right environment, the right sort of culture to sit in. We need to give them the right support and training and development and invest in people and value the role and understand that quite a lot of the time that role can be the difference between you hitting target or not this year. Yet we are going to plonk them in a corner and hope that they do it without any training and development. So I think there's a lot there that you can do to support.
Um, so you mentioned there about the mix of channels, the role of brand, etc. Now, obviously, one of the unusual things about your business, your agency, is that you kind of cover the whole spectrum, which I absolutely love, right? Because as we were talking about previously, like in my mind's sales marketing, two sides of the same coin. I mean, they basically are the same thing. It's just different channels. So really, really unreasonably difficult question. But to put you on the spot then, having all those different channels at your disposal, that complete sales and marketing spectrum, if tomorrow you had to say, do you know what, we've got to put all of our resources into just two channels, no more, no more. What would those two channels be, I wonder?
So for us, for our business, you mean?
For your business, for the whole sales and marketing activity, if you had to depend entirely on two channels, what would they be?
So social, and if I needed to pull that back to a particular platform, it would be LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is the single biggest revenue generating channel for us every year and has been for the last 2 or 3 years because we've got a brand, people see our content and they get in touch with us and are much closer to being buyer ready. And then the phone, because we practice what we preach and we know how, I think we know how to do that reasonably well, and we can scale it up, scale it down, have control over it reasonably well. I would say closely followed by PPC. So for us, PPC is an exceptionally effective channel. It's become less important over the years as we've matured and our brand has had a bigger impact and our outbound program has matured. But in the early days of the business, that was my first marketing strategy because it was immediate and because you can't build a brand overnight. You can't build an outbound channel overnight, but you can run PPC ads and start to get inbound traffic coming in. So 2 years ago, that might have been in there, but now those two are the top two for me.
That's awesome. And I just wondered, to what degree, so you mentioned LinkedIn there, to what degree are the individual reps getting involved in developing their own profiles, doing like joining it up with their own telesales activity? So it's just like it's another touch point in that individual relationship they have with somebody. Is it really just at a brand level and certain senior individuals like yourself driving that?
I guess it's like anything. There are certainly focus points across the business, and I'm a big believer in personal brand over company brand. So most of our inbound inquiries come from somebody in our leadership, even myself or somebody else in the leadership team coming into us. They don't come into the company channel, and people engage with our. We've done a lot of A/B testing across posts as well and content, and it goes out on a personal channel. It always gets a higher engagement rate and more views and more clicks than it would do through a company channel. So you need both, but that personal piece is important. At a sales rep level, it very much depends on the program we're running for our clients and what the strategy is to some degree, but we are using it. And there's a very simple technique that works really powerfully, which is when you have a conversation with somebody on the phone, regardless of the outcome, send them a LinkedIn request. It's amazing how quickly you can build your network with people who have spoken to you once but are happy to connect. And maybe only 30 to 50% will accept that within a sort of 7-day period. But what you're doing is growing your network with people who are relevant, people who might not be buyer ready today, but might be in the future. So yes, where our target market is spending time hanging out on LinkedIn and making buying decisions on LinkedIn or parts of buying decisions, that becomes part of the strategy for clients that we feel it's relevant for, or they're open to letting us adopt their LinkedIn as well.
Yeah. So I've got a question that I have a personal interest in, and you said something earlier which I think may provide part of the answer. So I just wonder, when you're bringing in new salespeople, and as you say, often these individuals, they might be fairly early on in their career. Now, if the product being sold is technical and the buyer journey is fairly complex, how do you get these people up to speed and making an impact as quickly as possible? Is it a case of kind of, segmenting like the different stages so that you say, "Do you know what, we know you can't, realistically it's going to be a year, 2 years before you can get to here, but maybe in those 3 months, 6 months, you can take the conversation to here? Or is there something else that you can do to, obviously I'm assuming training is part of it, all of that, but are there other things you can do to get this person hitting the ground running as quickly as possible?
Yeah, and I think you've adhered to my point earlier, which is around you've got to look at what's right in the sales process, not just what somebody is capable of. So, am I capable of booking meetings that are really well qualified? Yes, but it's going to happen far less than the ones that I try to qualify less. And who is the best person to have that conversation? So, for me, if I've got a 25K a year BDE who's got 1 year experience, fresh out of university, do I want them having technical conversations about the product with a CTO of a scale up business, Series B? They've got 25 million of funding and they're making serious decisions about technology investment? Or do I want my account executive or pre-sales technical team or somebody else who can actually answer the questions credibly, be confident? Well, I think the answer to that is pretty obvious. Now, what you don't want is those really expensive technical people making cold calls, because that's highly ineffective, very expensive. The same is true the other way around, though. So what we need to do is find that sensible handover point. So at what point are we going to say this conversation becomes better for person B over person A? And what most organizations do is push person A, i.e. the sales rep, to keep moving it down the funnel, because later in the funnel, they want gimmies. They want a little touch, put the ball in the goal from 2 yards out, and not to do their work. And actually we want to be, I'm a believer in handing leads over to some degree as early as possible. If I'm talking to you, I've identified you're involved in the sales process. I've identified there's some kind of level of curiosity, engagement, need, requirement, and you're happy to go and talk to somebody else. I can get far more out of you by booking an hour in with, or 45 minutes in with, somebody who knows a lot more than I do, who's got 15 years experience of doing this, who's an expert, than I can trying to force more and more out of you in this 5-10 minute conversation when my knowledge is limited and your time is limited. So I'm always going to caveat it with that. I think handover to AEs, BDMs, that kind of stuff should happen a lot earlier in the process than it does in most organizations. And I think we're asking too much of people at the top of the funnel. Having said that, back to the point earlier, they've got to be credible. They can't say, I don't know, and expect to be successful. So there has to be a degree of product training. There has to be a degree of sales training and a degree of, what are the questions that we're going to get asked? What are the objections that we're going to have to handle? What are the problems we're solving? Why would a company want to take our solution, and what difference would it make to them in real terms? And what difference does it make to the CTO or the CIO or the CEO or the finance director, or, seeing things from different angles so that they can translate that into conversations. Coaching, so listening to themselves on calls, self-critiquing, coming up with ideas on ways they can approach it, even training around things like tone of voice and, those sorts of softer communication skills are important as well. And I think also realistic expectations, giving people time. There's something about this role where people expect miracles. We'll just start picking meetings and they'll just buy. So giving people patience, time, and sensible expectations will really help them to succeed. But again, back to the first point, I truly believe that you get too technical in that first conversation, it's really hard. You try and answer all of their technical questions, and all you're doing is digging yourself a hole to find the point at which you can't answer it anymore, and you lose the opportunity. So one of our most powerful sales techniques is to say, do you know what? Great question. Actually, Rob's the right person to answer that question, because he does this, this, and this, and this. What I can do is get Rob to give you a call, or let's set up a time. We can jump on a Zoom call and we'll run through that with you together, or when's a good time to do that. My job is to book meetings in the pipeline. If you're asking that question, chances are you are involved in the sales process and it's the right kind of question. It's a great way to get meetings booked in the diary for sales reps who I'll caveat that, should be able to step in and do a better job than junior SDR can do with a year's experience. That's my take on it, at least.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. And presumably it's easier, is it, if there's quite a clear message that SDR is delivering. So as opposed to it being a sort of fairly kind of vague, open conversation where I guess they're likely to end up having to say, I don't know, lots of times. Instead, if there's one particular message that's being communicated, and then you get to that inevitable point where the question is asked, they can't answer it, as you say, that's then the call to action to bring Rob in. It Is that important, that sort of that clarity of that initial message? Are we talking about a kind of 2 or 3 minute phone call here, or is it sort of like, does it need to be a more extensive conversation? Because I'm also a believer, and I think this is true in marketing, that actually sometimes you need to engage with people for a certain period of time in order to get them invested in that conversation. So, it's the reason why 15-minute infomercials tend to sell better than 30-second brand adverts. And I imagine the same is true over the phone. So where's that balance between the kind of crystal clear message delivered in 30 seconds, but they're not terribly invested, versus 15-minute open ambiguous, and also might put the SDR in a slightly tricky position?
Mm. Well, and this is about giving people the structure of conversation that they should be having. So you don't go into a cold call not knowing what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. You practice it, you rehearse it, just like you would any other job that you do professionally. You don't go into anything without practicing your trade if you're going to be exceptionally good at it. So structure of conversation is important. I think, in answer to your question, the data tells us two things. That if we can keep somebody on the phone for 6 minutes, they're twice as likely, give or take, to say yes to something. Because usually before 6 minutes, you get the ones that are going to say no are going to have said no by now. Equally, though, when you think about it, if I present to you, however I structure my sales conversation, and people do it in all sorts of different ways, if I say to you, in paraphrasing, we do this, we help you with that, and we help solve that problem, and this is effectively my offering, and I'm putting it on the table to talk to you about, and you start to go, okay, can you tell me a bit about this, or how does that work? That tells me there's a level of curiosity. Because why would you ask questions if it wasn't relevant to you or interesting? You would just say, thanks, no thanks, not relevant, we're not in budget, I'm not the right person. You'd just be upfront, because why would you waste your time? So my view is, if I've clearly communicated how I can help you, what it is I do, what the problems are that I can solve for you, and that is relevant, and you begin to ask me questions, that is a very good buying signal. That is a very good sign that you want to know more about this. Whether you've admitted it to yourself or you realize that yourself as a buyer doesn't matter, but you are curious to some degree. It's my job to make sure that you're curious enough that when I hang up that phone, you're not going to go missing. You're going to turn up to the next meeting. So, if I just go, oh, you asked a question, I'll book a meeting, too early. But I can start to have a little bit of a conversation with you and say, look, great question. I can give you a bit, but what I'll do is make sure that we follow this up with X, Y, and Z. And I'm leading them through a sales process. So I would say probably yes, you answer a question, you answer two, you throw a question back at them. One of the best tricks in sales is like, how good are your questions? So you ask me a question, so how does that work? And I said, well, could be that, and that. Tell me out of interest, how do you do that now? Or what's going on within the business just now? Or what have you done previously? What's worked well for you? Whatever those questions might be for you. Now I'm back in control of the conversation and you're answering my questions. I'm learning about your business. I'm listening so I can hear what I need to say next. But if that goes back and forth 2, 3, 4 times and there's still a conversation there, I mean, I've got to start thinking about booking a meeting. All of this is caveated by that's assuming that that's the success measurement for your top of funnel, and that is the sales process for you. Some people might sell over the phone or might not be looking to book a meeting. I don't know, but yeah, I think that would be my view on it. That we need to get the balance right. A successful conversation should be somewhere between, I don't know, minimum 3 to 4 minutes if it's really quick. 10 to 12 minutes max, somewhere in there. If you start to get to 15 minutes long, and it's happened naturally and organically, fine, but hopefully that's happened after you've already booked the meeting and you've closed and you've just carried on talking, not wondering, because otherwise you're investing all that time to then try and close in a meeting and they say no, and you think, well, that wasn't very efficient, was it? So yeah, I think that's the sort of length I'd be looking for. Averaging 5 to 6 minutes is a fairly reasonable, 5 to 7 minutes is a reasonable average length of a booked meeting conversation with a sensible attendance rate afterwards, i.e. people that didn't just go, whoa, what happened there? I booked a meeting, I don't even know what it was for.
That is fascinating stuff. Really, really fascinating. So last question then. So I'm a strong believer that every marketer, this almost never happens, but every marketer should gain some experience in sales. I just wonder, is there a particular function that you think that sales should look at and say, do you know what, for us to be the best we can be, we could actually learn a hell of a lot from a bit of experience in that function or that function? Is there a particular area of business that springs to mind?
There are two, one of which is the obvious one, and then one that's less obvious. The obvious one is the other way around, is marketing, because sales has become more about copywriting. Yeah, we've got to write our own content as salespeople now. And, do we write that as salespeople? Do we write that as marketeers? Because people receive written social or email content in a different way to the way that they do verbal content. So I think the same is true the other way around. The other one, and this will take me back to my answer to your very first question around knowledge is finance. So I find, particularly if you're selling into financial decision makers or CEOs, business owners, or operational people, people who have GMs, that kind of stuff, people who have a view on the business's performance, if you ask them how a business is performing, almost always their leading indicator will be finance, will be numbers. How's your business done this well? Oh, revenue's gone up, or margin's gone down, or whatever. Even if their job is technical, they'll tend to be across that and understand that. So if you can understand finance, even to a basic level, that really helps you to interpret what it might mean for a business. So we are doing this. We're building a new website. We're developing our own software. Well, what does that actually mean? In real terms, it means that they're spending a shirtload of money, nearly to all there, shirtload of money on either internal developers, an external development company. They're going through all sorts of project management pain, resources getting drained. They maybe have to hire a project manager. You can interpret that into what it actually means for the business, because what it actually means is performance, success. That's what they care about. They don't care about whether that bit of that project was done today. They care about the end result. So I think finance, we all run a business because of finance. We want to financially succeed at an individual level and as a business. Everything else, that's just the outcome at the end. Everything else is just part of the journey. So finance for me is something that I think gets ignored and missed too much, but can actually play a really important role in commercial conversations.
As you say, that's ultimately what it's about, right? Everything else is just a vehicle for getting there. Look, Owen, thank you. I knew I was going to enjoy this. I always think the best interviews are those where I almost kind of forget like it's an interview, and I'm just asking the questions I really want to ask. So I really want to thank you for your time today. Yeah, really enjoyed it.
Pleasure. Me too. Thank you for having me.